So my research explored young people's experiences of engaging with youth offending services. And I chose this quote from a young person to put into the title because I felt like it really encapsulated the overarching theme of the thesis and kind of summarised their perceptions and experiences really nicely. So youth offending services were introduced in 1998, and since they were created, there's been a 78% decrease in youth crime. However, they aren't successful in supporting all young people, with high levels of reoffending after young people's involvement in youth offending services. And this is the group we're concerned about. They're a vulnerable group with high reoffending rates and also high NEET rates, and the long-term consequences of this are hugely negative. So it's really important that we explore how best to support this population. But at the moment, there's really limited research around young people's experiences of youth offending services. So this research aims to address that gap. I had 3 research questions. How do young people perceive their experiences of youth offending services? What are the aspirations of young people within youth offending services? And what do professionals identify as supportive factors and barriers affecting young people they work with? So I used a 3-phase qualitative design using Bronfen and Brenner's person, process, context, time model. So firstly, I interviewed 5 professionals who worked within the youth offending service, and they all directly supported young people within different roles, and this provided a good insight into how young people are supported within the YOS. I then interviewed 6 young people via Microsoft Teams, and then finally in phase 3, I went back and re-interviewed the adults from phase 1 to ascertain what level of support they were able to provide during the pandemic. When I interviewed the young people, I decided to use the grid elaboration method, and this involves presenting young people with a blank grid with 4 boxes using the Microsoft whiteboard feature, and then they were asked to represent with a word, image or phrase their associations with the YOS. So this person said program, mentor, routine and resilience. And then they're questioned in turn to elaborate on their associations in as much detail as possible for all 4 of their answers. I then did some scaling, so on a scale of 1 to 10, how would you rate your experience of youth offending services? And then further questioning was used, such as, you rated it an 8, why did you rate it an 8 and not a 7? And why did you rate it an 8 and not a 9? And this allowed me to explore further their experiences and perceptions of youth offending services. To ascertain their aspirations, I used the miracle question on the left-hand side, and then I scribed their answers using a mind map and shared this on the screen. And this was a really nice visual way to gather their aspirations, and they were able to add to the answers as we went along. And this also allowed me to explore their motivations underlying their aspirations as well. And it was a really nice way of exploring young people's aspirations, and they all gave really detailed answers. So research question 3 was intertwined with 1 and 2 as it provided valuable context to the young people's accounts. So first of all, looking at research question 1, within the study, the YOS provided young people with a reflective space, and this facilitated a shift in perspectives, with young people talking about their reflective insights into their actions and explicitly linking them with consequences. There was also a shift in their perspectives from solely focusing on the present to thinking more about the future, and they did this by evaluating the value of criminal behaviour towards their long-term aspirations. Young people also experienced personal growth following their YOS sessions. So one young person commented that they felt they could do anything now they've completed their YOS sessions. And there was a real sense of young people experiencing this sense of achievement for the first time in comparison to their previous experiences of being excluded from college and school. And there was lots of factors that contributed to this development of the reflective space and also the young people's personal growth, particularly the way professionals worked with young people. They used a flexible approach and shared strategies and knowledge between themselves, and this allowed them to utilise the best way of working with each individual. The online sessions as well were also really successful in supporting young people. They commented on its ease and the efficiency to access services, And also, young people spoke about feeling safe in their home environment when talking about personal subjects and topics. A few barriers young people faced. So they spoke about their frustration and being asked repetitive questions regarding their offence, and this led them to feeling unmotivated during this period. Professionals also discussed the time constraints within young people's orders, and this created barriers to firstly build attuned relationships and then to complete the intervention within a specific time frame. And lastly, the transference of young people's knowledge gained from the YOS to the home environment was reflected upon in the professionals' interviews. They were described as being safe during their involvement in youth offending services. However, difficulties appeared to arise during their transition away from services. So it suggested that more support was required during this transition. So looking at research question 2, comparable to their peers, all young people spoke in detail about their future aspirations, such as aspiring to be business owners, warehouse workers, and becoming an architect. They also it also highlighted the mismatch between young people's long-term aspirations and their short-term goals. And this discrepancy is commonly seen in the general adolescent population, so it almost normalises participants' aspirations within society. The main difference between young people within the study and their peers was the exposure to career opportunities, and professionals reported that young people within youth offending services are not having exposure to work experience, and this means that they're being influenced by others without having any further knowledge of alternative opportunities available to them. There was also limited opportunities available to them, both within an educational sense, and they were being offered ESOL courses, and also reduced job opportunities. And also, young people within youth offending services were being faced with many negative attitudes towards them. Professionals spoke about young people who were actively engaged in education. However, when they declared their offence, they were excluded from college. So it really highlighted the wider environmental factors that needed to change to really support young people to access education, training and employment. And this is what's likely contributing to the high NEET rates and the high reoffending rates within this population. So looking at national implications, it shows that societal factors are still a significant barrier for this population, and that we need to be targeting the stigma attached to young people who are enrolled with youth offending services, and also to increase the opportunities available to them to truly support young people to access education, training and employment. Moving on to YOS implications, a person-centred and creative method is required when supporting young people to reflect on their offence, and this is something that EPs are well equipped to support YOS professionals with, such as using approaches like meta-mirroring and narrative psychology, and this could be a really nice creative visual method to do this. Also shows that young people's voices should be obtained frequently during their order, as this can provide a valuable insight into how best to support them. And more consideration is needed to support young people during their transition away from services, and what in particular would be useful during the transition. Flexibility in the interventions is also something that would be useful, so young people could have access to the interventions even after their order has finished. And lastly, EP implications. EPs should be asking about young people who are enrolled with youth offending services during the planning meetings, to ensure that young people are having their needs identified and supported in schools. EPs are well placed to support YOS professionals in obtaining young people's aspirations, using approaches like maps and paths to consider their long-term aspirations and then implement backward planning, so young people are aware of the small steps they need to take to achieve their goal. And lastly, EPs can provide support to YOS teams to reflect on the complex environments and how best to support them using approaches such as solution circles.